Director of Student Support Services for Mattawamkeag Schools. This is our third community event that we have hosted as part of our Zephyr Wellness Initiative. This initiative was made possible mostly in part due to the May Fund a Need grant that we were able to obtain last spring. So that grant has funded opportunities like these. It's also funded opportunities for increasing staff development around mental wellness and also increasing student engagement projects. And so it's really kind of three-tiered in terms of creating opportunities to support students, to intervene with students, and to engage the public at large like we're doing today. So we've been really proud of what we've done this year. So hopefully you'll feel the same as being part of this opportunity tonight. I just wanted to say a couple housekeeping things. We printed more CEUs, so we'll have those in the back. Barb Duffrin, our superintendent, has them right there. I just want to thank Dr. Mike Newbeck in the middle school for hosting. This has been our venue for these events this year, and I think they're working out really well. Donatelli's was able to provide the food today. So without continuing on here, I'll hand it off to Jessica Dresden and Natalie Garrity from Embolden Youth, and they're going to kick off the presentation today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tony. We are so excited to be here. So welcome, everyone. I know weeknights can kind of be busy, so thank you so much for taking your time to spend it with us on this cold Tuesday night. I'm Dr. Natalie Garrity, as Tony mentioned.
And I'm Dr. Jessica Dresden.
And we'll tell you a little bit more about ourselves in a minute, but we're curious just to kind of get a sense of who's all here. Show of hands, who has kids that are 5 and younger? Okay. And how about who has kids 6 to 12? Wow, all right.
Good mix so far.
And then how about 13 and older? We can't forget our teens. Okay, wow, look at this. We're representing all the age groups. That's awesome. So the good news about our presentation is that it's actually going to apply to all ages. So young kids, older kids. So when we say kids, we also mean teens. So yeah.
All right, and we're sure, right? You're just all dying to know what's the secret key ingredient we lured you in tonight, didn't we? Okay, and probably some of you have peeked ahead at the handout, so maybe you have an idea. If you haven't, just don't look at them quite yet, okay? So we want to make this an interactive presentation for you all tonight, so we're going to ask you some questions, encourage some participation. We might even ask for a brave volunteer to come up at some point. And we just ask if you all have questions, which we hope that you do. Please just jot them down. We've saved a good chunk of time at the end of the presentation, and we will be happy to answer all of your questions at that time. All right, so who are we? So just so you know that we're legit, right? And we're not some random people up here presenting to you. So we both have our doctorates in clinical psychology. Seriously, went to school for like ever, okay? We are also both licensed psychologists practicing in the community. So we have been seeing clients for approximately 10 years now.
I know we look young, and that's probably hard to believe, but we've seen clients all over the metro area. And now, being a former Zephyr myself, go Zephs, I thought it would be great to come back to the community and help support the community. So last year, Dr. Dresden and I decided to open up a clinic right down the road. We are called Embolden You, and we're right across from the library. And our practice actually sees kids from 5 all the way up to families, adults, 99 plus. So we see a wide range of individuals. And not only do we have this clinical experience, but we both are parents ourselves. So we do have the personal experience as well.
All right, so when we were trying to think about what would be the best presentation to give you all tonight, we obviously wanted to consider our experience in the office, right? Like, what are parents coming to tell us? What are children coming to tell us? What are some of the top concerns? So listed here are some of the top concerns that we tend to see. So parents often come to us and say, my child is really struggling to manage stress. I need help to help them to manage stress. Or anxiety. Maybe they're worried. Maybe they're having trouble completing or doing their homework. Maybe they're having troubles with their peers. So this could include bullying. It could be troubles maybe making friends or keeping friends, conflict with peers, feeling down or depressed, maybe withdrawing, not as interested in activities they used to enjoy, having conflict with family members, so siblings or parent conflict, or just parents wanting strategies in general just to help their children.
So what are we hearing from the kiddos? This is what you guys want to know, right? So as you look over this list, so what's wrong with me? I can't tell my parents. I'm not good enough. I fail at everything. As you're reading that, you may be thinking, my kid has probably never thought that, or my kid wouldn't say that, or maybe some of you are thinking like, yeah, I'm hearing this on a regular basis. Either way, we just want to acknowledge that at least at one time in your child's life, they probably have thought these things. And I think, in fact, we can all agree, even as adults, at least one point in our life, we have thought one or two of these things. So kind of the themes that we are seeing here with what we're hearing, the kids are feeling maybe misunderstood, alone in their struggles. They're feeling ashamed. They're feeling, what is wrong with me? Something is inherently wrong with me. They're also feeling like they need to be perfect and are striving to achieve goals and yet feeling like they're falling short. So always trying to strive to be perfect, but then not really measuring up to that.
All right, and again, not sure what you all guessed the secret key ingredient to be, but I'm guessing you maybe weren't expecting to come to a presentation tonight on validation. So some of you may be thinking, what is validation? I think I know what it is, but I'm not really sure. Or some of you may be thinking, I do know what validation is, and I don't need this presentation. I already have this, okay? And we're here to tell you, I hear some laughs, okay? So
Good.
We're here to tell you that this is actually a really complex skill. So even us who have taught classes on validation, who have really learned this skill in depth, we still struggle. And out of those concerns that we just went over from the parents and the children, one common theme tends to be present, and that is invalidation, whether that be self-invalidation or invalidation from others. Okay, so that's one really common theme. And we hope that we can stress to you all tonight how important validation is for your children, for their emotional well-being, and for their development. Because if we don't address these concerns early on, we tend to see much more major concerns as adults.
Okay, so we are going to watch a short little movie clip here, and I'm hoping from that picture, maybe some of you know this movie, but Home Alone, a good family classic for the holidays. And yes, you can always count on us psychologists to analyze even the sweetest, nicest holiday movies. So we're going to quick watch that, and what we want you to look for is just jot down anything in the interaction between Kevin and his mom that you might think to be invalidating. So again, just kind of watch for phrases or how they're interacting and just jot that down, and we'll actually come back to that later. So let's see here.
Oh, I'm sorry. This house is just crazy. Look at all these little kids running around. My brother-in-law drove in from Ohio today. It's just nuts.
How come you didn't bring more cheese pizzas?
Nice tip. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Having a reunion or something?
Oh, no, my husband's brother transferred to Paris last summer, and both of his kids are still going to school here, and I guess he missed the whole family. He's giving us all this trip to Paris for the holiday so we can be together.
You're taking a trip to Paris?
Yes, we hope to leave tomorrow morning.
Excellent.
If you'll excuse me, this one's a little out of sorts. I'll be right back.
Don't worry about me. I spoke to your husband already. And don't worry about your home. It's in good hands.
There are 15 people in this house. You're the only one who has to make trouble.
I'm the only one doing dum-dum.
You're the only one acting up. Now, get upstairs.
I am upstairs, dummy. 3rd floor?
Go.
It's scary up there.
Don't be silly. Fuller will be up in a little while.
I don't want a super fella. You know about him. He wets the bed. He'll pee all over me. I know it.
Fine. We'll put him somewhere else.
I'm sorry.
It's too late. Get upstairs.
Everyone in this family hates me.
Then maybe you should ask Santa for a new family.
I don't want a new family. I don't want any family. Families suck.
Just stay up there. I don't want to see you again for the rest of the night.
I don't want to see you again for the rest of my whole life. And I don't want to see anybody else either.
I hope you don't mean that. You'd feel pretty sad if you woke up tomorrow morning and you didn't have a family.
No, I wouldn't.
Then say it again. Maybe it'll happen.
I hope I never see any jerks again.
Okay. Let's see if we can. All right, so again, let's see. Okay, so again, just jot down any thoughts, reactions that you have about any of the parts there that might be invalidating, and we're going to come back to that later. Is it going back to the big screen? It's not. This is our test technology.
Perfect. All right, we got it.
Okay.
Okay, so another reason we really wanted to present on this tonight as well is because what we know the research shows. So the research shows that invalidation is strongly connected with such a wide range of concerns. So invalidation is connected with just general mental health issues, things such as anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, even poor academic success. And this doesn't have to be those really intense levels of invalidation either. Also, invalidation can be connected with an unstable sense of self, so just difficulty understanding who we are as a person, so we call that identity concerns. Dysregulation can also happen, whether that be behavioral dysregulation with the impulsivity or emotional dysregulation, so emotions kind of all over the place. Also, invalidation can be connected to more extreme things or even life-threatening serious things, including suicidal ideation and self-injurious behaviors. Obviously, the more serious concerns tend to be related to more serious types of invalidation and chronic invalidation over time. Poor relationships, which we'll get to later in the presentation, and truly the list goes on and on.
So what is invalidation, right? So you might have an idea, but it's actually pretty complex. And why it's complex is because it can happen really subtly. And so a lot of times we think of invalidation as being blatantly mean, and yet it can happen, like I said, in really subtle ways. So invalidation is discrediting another person's experience, telling that person that what they're thinking or feeling is wrong. It's essentially dismissing or rejecting their feelings. So, for example, maybe some of you have had this happen. You're sound asleep in the middle of the night, all of a sudden a kid walks in your room and they're like, I'm so scared, I can't sleep, I'm really scared. And in that moment, you might respond with like, there's nothing to be scared of. You don't have to be frightened. Just go back to bed. Just go back to bed. It's fine. And so that might seem insignificant because, again, this is a common thing that could happen. And yet, what we just did there was, again, we weren't trying to be blatantly mean. We were trying to help our child. And yet what we did was we dismissed their feelings. And so they were saying, I'm feeling scared. And we said, no, you're not. And so what that does is it actually tells the child that it isn't safe to come to you and to share their emotions with you. So again, this might seem pretty insignificant to just happen once or twice, but over time, if we're doing these subtle things in subtle invalidating phrases, that actually teaches your child that they cannot come to you and it's not safe to share their feelings. And again, that's actually going to disconnect your child from you over time. So as parents, it's our natural instinct to not want to see our children suffer. And so in that moment, again, we aren't trying to be cruel or mean, but we are trying to get them to feel better because it's distressing to us when our children are suffering. And so making sure that we can practice sitting and tolerating their distressing emotions and not feeling like we need to tell them to stop feeling that way. And the key here is that we all do this. And so not to beat yourself up if you have done this, but we all do this. And even, again, as psychologists, we are constantly being mindful of this skill.
All right, so one of the most eye-opening exercises when we teach parents about invalidation in our offices is actually reviewing a list of invalidating phrases. Okay, so my favorite one on the list, we just chose some from the handout to show you here, is the calm down one. So how many in here have ever been told at some point in their life, calm down, okay? And how many of you actually calm down as a result, right? Probably not many of you. So my husband, he has said that to me. I will never forget the first time he said it to me, and he probably won't forget it either, okay? All right, so before we go over the list, though, you may have even peeked at that handout. We want to stress this presentation is not to shame you or to make you feel bad. So I have a lot of parents who will look at this list and be like, I'm a terrible parent. Oh my gosh, I've said so many of these things. This is not to make you feel bad, okay? We just want this to be an eye-opening exercise. Again, we've all probably said at least one phrase off of this list. So with that in mind, if you all could take a look at the handout 1, invalidating phrases, there's a front and back to this handout. We'll give you a moment to take a look at that. We'll give you just another quick moment here. All right, so any reactions to reading some of the phrases on the handout? You can just feel free to shout them out.
Yeah.
Yep.
I remember reading the Siblings Without Rivalry book, and so a lot of this of like validating their feelings that, oh, I know you want to punch your sister right now. Or
Yes.
something, and it's like, it's so against what I think, like, I don't want to make it okay for them to make
Exactly.
but it's like, it makes them feel better to be validated.
Totally, totally.
Okay,
Right, it can go against our natural instinct, which we're going to get into kind of common misconceptions, or even how do you handle those tough situations. We're going to go into that later on. How do you actually handle those really tough situations? What can you do? But yeah, thank you. Any other reactions? Yeah.
If you say, I feel like, and then somebody's statement, is that the same?
If you're saying, I feel like, can you give me an example off the list?
I feel like you have a problem.
That would be invalidating. So you could definitely, I like how you're using some ownership there,
that's
right?
good.
So
I
you're
statements.
acknowledging
Yes.
the I statements. So you're acknowledging that these are your feelings. You could definitely say like, I am concerned about you. I am concerned about X, Y, and Z, because that's demonstrating the concern to them. And that feels more validating than like, you got a problem, right? I hope that answers your question. All right. All right. So, and again, we'll have more time for question and answer at the end. So if anything else pops up, even with looking at these handouts, just please let us know then.
All right, so now that we talked about what invalidation is, let's get to the good stuff. What is validation? So if you feel comfortable, you can close your eyes. If not, that's okay too. But if you want to think of a person in your mind that you feel most connected to, and it can be in the past or present, I want you to think who this person is, what makes you feel connected to them, what qualities do they possess, and how do they make you feel when you're with them? Okay, if you had your eyes closed, go ahead and open them up. So at the end of the day, as human beings, we strive to feel accepted and connected to others. We want to feel heard and feel that our experience matters. So I'm guessing that the person that you were just imagining actually possesses characteristics of validation. Maybe you've never even thought of that. So the reason why I'm guessing that is because validation connects us to other people. When we feel heard and accepted, we're actually more likely to feel connected to a person. So, validation, the definition, it acknowledges another person's experience, lets others know their thoughts, feelings, and opinions are worthwhile. Because of that, this is a top relationship building strategy, and so it strengthens relationships. I'm guessing because you're all here tonight that you guys want to feel connected to your kids. And so that is why this is so important and why validation is a great relationship building skill. Also, this skill helps diffuse stressful situations, and it can de-escalate intense emotions. And actually, Dr. Dresden will speak about that a little further in just a moment. It also teaches self-acceptance, because if a person feels that their experience matters, then they are going to accept their experience and their feelings. And then I know we all want our kids to succeed and achieve, and so validation actually promotes that, because when someone is confident in themselves and they know that their experience matters, they're actually likely to achieve more. So as I just went over validation and what it is, can you please just let me know if you have any thoughts, reactions, and sometimes we might have some concerns when we start thinking about validation and using it with your kids. So go ahead, let us know if you have any concerns or thoughts that just come to mind right now. Yeah.
Sometimes my validation comes off as like bribery.
Sure.
Or like, what are you doing validating my feelings? Because I'm not consistent with it. So
Sure.
like when I get this super mom moment and I'm like, I'm going to just zone into my kid today. She's like, get away from me.
What are you doing?
I'm taking this in like a sponge because I don't want it to come off like a sales pitch or...
Totally. And I think you're going to find tonight, so when we go over actually what to do, I think you're going to find that there may be some more natural ways that you can introduce this, and it's going to be more subtle, so she's not probably going to have as strong of a reaction like, Mom, what are you doing? I mean, sometimes kids can react to the validation, and that's okay. If they're acting differently or having a reaction to you doing that, that's okay. They'll get used to it over time. The more you demonstrate these skills, the more they'll get used to it. But I think you'll find that there'll be some concrete strategies that are even more subtle that you can introduce, and perhaps even easier for you too. Yeah.
That's a great concern.
Yeah. Any other kind of concerns about using validation, judgments?
Yeah, I got about like, is there a concern about over-validating like insignificant things? Like, off the top of my head, like my second grader was like, look, Dad, I read this book, and it's a book that her kindergartner brothers are reading. How would I like not be validator, but not?
So really, talk about validation, validating the feeling like, wow, you are so proud that you read that book. And so that is actually a great form because you're validating the feeling. So there's a difference between validating a behavior and validating a feeling. So it sounds like she was really proud, right?
Well, that wasn't an exact example.
Oh, sure. But
like if she keeps coming to you, you're saying?
like,
yeah, with like insignificant things, like, hey, I'm glad you're proud of that, but that's not something you should be proud of.
So we're going to talk about what not to do with validation. So, and I want to say too that our experience is totally different than our child's experience. So what is significant to them likely isn't significant to you. Like a child may be like, oh my gosh, like I put my pants on today, and we're like, we put our pants on every day, right? So that is significant to her. It sounds like she's coming to you for that validation. Actually, that's actually a behavior where she's seeking validation. If she's seeking maybe like unhelpful things, and we never want to validate the invalid, which we're going to get to as well, but it sounds like she's wanting you to fill her up with some validation. So that's a technique that we'll use in therapy, is when a child is demonstrating a behavior such as that, we use that as information that the child probably needs something extra, and we have the mindset of we want to fill them up with that, because if we fill them up with that, they're going to decrease the behavior over time, if that makes sense. Okay. All right.
Yes.
So yes, great questions.
What if
Go
they
ahead.
need constant validation?
I would wonder why they need constant validation. Yeah, I would want to know a little bit more about that. So I would want to know like the frequency of it, how much it's happening, and perhaps why it's happening. Is it happening during certain times? Is it happening, for example, when you're cooking dinner and they're feeling maybe like neglected during that time? Maybe they just had a long day at school and they really want to connect with you, and then you're busy because you have to cook dinner and you have to do all of this stuff, right? And they're really trying to connect. So I would probably wonder a bit more about why it's happening so often. Yeah. Okay, yep.
I have a question about the validating when hormones are involved. It's like 19 and the girls are just keep going on, and at what point do you stop validating and say, okay, that's not really
We'll probably address that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that one.
Yes.
We'll come back to that
Yes,
one. Yes,
absolutely.
great question.
That's a
really
good
great question.
Yeah.
All right, so you actually didn't name, we were like, oh, there's all these top concerns they're gonna name. So this is what we tend to hear in our offices, okay? We will get to more examples and definitely answer those questions and circle back to them. But the things that we tend to hear in our offices is, okay, if I validate too much, I'm going to be engaging in permissive parenting. Maybe I'll be being too soft with them or letting them off the hook or giving in. I won't have boundaries or limits with them. We want to let you know, like, we want you to set limits with your children. That's a healthy thing to do, because what happens is if we treat our children as fragile, the opposite can happen, which is called learned helplessness, and we don't want that either, because learned helplessness is where they internalize that they can't handle what life is throwing at them, okay? So we know, though, that setting limits with them, because sometimes we do have to set limits. And when we set limits, we want to actually pair that with validation, because children are likely to receive that so much better, okay? And we forget to use the validation because we're the ones in charge, we're the bosses, right? And if we were to think, for example, of you all having a boss, I'm sure a lot of you in the audience actually have a boss, okay? So let's think about this for a moment. So if your boss came to you and let you know that your organization was going to have a lot of changes happening, okay? And let's say that these changes were going to negatively affect you and you were not happy about the changes. Okay, which boss would you prefer here? So the first boss who comes to you and says, hey, we're having these changes. They start tomorrow. And you express frustration like, what? These changes are happening tomorrow? And this is going to negatively affect me? And they're like, well, it is what it is. Okay, so consider that boss versus the boss who comes and even predicts your feelings for you and says, I know these changes are likely to be really frustrating for you. I'm sure you don't want these changes to happen. Unfortunately, these changes do need to happen, and we acknowledge how hard you're working. We really appreciate all that you're doing. We know this is really frustrating. Okay, which boss is going to promote the smoother transition? And which one do you think you're likely to work harder for? Okay, I think we can all agree we would want the second boss because they acknowledge us and understand us, and we feel like we matter to them, and we're gonna work way harder for that person who we feel like gets us, okay? So again, limit setting tends to work best when we pair it with validation. Your children are going to be much more likely to hear you and to follow what you have to say, okay?
All right, so after just going over the common misconceptions, we want to talk about what validation is not. So to start, we're just going to watch this quick clip here. It's not about the nail.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless, and I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail...
See, you're not...
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. I'm not sleeping very well at all, and all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on, if you would just...
Don't!
Try to say things my way, till I have to keep on talking.
Okay, I'm glad we got some chuckles because we've all been in that situation, right? So validation is not problem solving. even when the solution is painfully obvious, as it was here, and sometimes when we're talking to our kids and it's painfully obvious to us, but not to them, we do not want to jump into problem solving. Because when we jump into problem solving, usually our child is going to get defensive, and they're not even going to hear. If we have this brilliant solution, they're not going to hear us anyway. So it's really important to remember that although we're coming from good intentions and a good place of, hey, if you just do this, it will be better, that is going to disconnect us because usually we feel really defensive. So for example, applying it to, an adult situation, say you're having a really hard day at work and you're on your way home and you decide to call a friend and you're like, hey, I just had the worst day ever. It was just awful. I'm so stressed. And your friend's first response was, well, did you talk to your boss? And in that moment, maybe kind of feeling annoyed and irritated, like, okay, I am a competent, smart person. Of course I thought of that, but that's not the point, right? Mm-hmm. And so remembering that oftentimes when we are struggling, we don't want someone to come in and give us the solution because a lot of times we do know it. And so with children, it is important that if we want to stay connected to them, that we don't jump right into problem solving, that we sit and validate their feelings first. And then eventually we can maybe introduce some problem solving, but really, really practicing sitting with their emotions and tolerating your own distress with their distress to not want to just jump in and problem solve. Okay, validation is also not approval or agreement. So, for example, I know someone had mentioned the child hitting you. If your child hits you, obviously we don't approve of that behavior. We can, though, still validate the emotion behind the behavior, the emotion that triggered the behavior. So, whoa, you're feeling really angry right now, and it's not okay to hit. So remember, the validation part there is acknowledging the emotion that actually triggered the behavior. Also, say you have a teen who is talking back, talking really rude, maybe swearing at you. Obviously, we don't approve of that behavior, but we can still validate the emotion that triggered that. Again, whoa, you are really upset right now, and we don't talk like that in our family. And so again, you can validate the emotion while also setting limits. Let's see, oops, I didn't mean to click that.
Yeah.
Okay, validation is not validating the invalid. So again, we don't want to validate a behavior that is inappropriate. So we don't want to validate and say, hey, yes, it's okay to hit. I know it's okay to hit. Obviously, that doesn't make sense. And so we just want to make sure that we're validating the emotion and not the behavior. Validation is not sharing your own personal experiences. So this is another one that is hard that we tend to fall into. So for example, going back to that movie clip, if he would have said, you know what, I had the worst headache a couple years ago. It went on for days. And you know what, my head is still throbbing just thinking about it. And he started sharing his experience. Do you think she would have responded well to that? Probably not. So oftentimes, even as parents, we tend to think, oh, I'm going to share my own experience to make you feel better. So the classic, when I was your age, I walked uphill both ways, all of that. And trying to share your experience is actually going to invalidate theirs. It makes them feel like that your experience is more important than theirs. So again, we're often coming from a good place in doing that, but it will actually disconnect us from our children. Validation is also not complimenting or cheerleading. So we're not saying do not compliment or cheerlead your children. Those are really great skills, but they're separate skills from validation. So just saying something like, way to go, or you got this, that actually doesn't count as validation. So we want to be mindful that we can pair those cheerleading and compliments with validation, because validation is much more complex than that.
All right, so why is validation helpful? So to understand why validation is helpful, we wanted to share a tool with you all that we use in our sessions with clients. So this is called a relationship circle. So you'll see here in the center of the relationship circle is you. So this is an odd concept, one you've maybe never even thought about, but you have a relationship with yourself. Okay, again, something we don't often think about, but it's important to consider because your relationship with yourself impacts all of your other relationships, okay? And at some point in therapy, we'll usually ask our clients if we were to have someone following you around all day talking to you the way that you talk to yourself? Would you be friends with that person? Literally, nearly everyone says no. And that's, again, the invalidation theme, why we really wanted to talk about this tonight. Likewise, the closest relationships to you, for example, primary support, which is you all, has a significant impact on the individual, okay? And we know that children internalize aspects of their environment. You all are modeling for your children their internal self-talk, okay? And kids, again, internalize that. So I know this is a lot of pressure, but this is why validation is so important, because we want you to be modeling those validating phrases. So why else is validation helpful? So Dr. Garrity mentioned before, validation can help to de-escalate intense emotions. Again, we often want to reason with a child who is upset. So maybe we want them to feel differently because we don't want them to be in distress, or maybe we don't even agree with what they're experiencing, okay? What happens though is that reasoning actually can intensify their emotional experience. So I don't know if you all have ever experienced this, where your child is really upset and you're trying to reason with them, but it's this way, or you should see it like this, or this is why I'm responding like this. And then they kind of shoot up and they don't, like, that doesn't work very well. Well, the reason is actually based on brains and how our brains work. So if this was our brains, this is the front part of our brains. This is our prefrontal cortex, where we do all our thinking, planning, organizing. This is the limbic system here, my thumb. This is the emotional part of our brains. When we're feeling calm and feeling good, those two things are connected, okay? When we are feeling more intense emotions, and the more intense emotion, the more this happens, we all do this thing, not just children, but adults too, called flipping our lids. Okay, when we flip our lids, the emotions are really running the show. So if we were to do a brain scan, we would see that all the energy is really concentrated in the limbic system, where the emotions are. Okay, so we know that one strategy though to bring that lid back down is actually validation, because the child feels heard and acknowledged and not challenged, because our brains physically, they cannot actually access that reasoning part of their brain, so it's frustrating to them. When they're validated though, come back to the reasoning later, okay? Just don't reason with them in that moment. All right. Validation also supports others during times of distress. We've all been around someone who's been distressed in their lives, right? And for some people that can be really uncomfortable. So maybe we want to help them feel differently or feel better, or maybe we don't even know what to say. Validation comes in really handy because it gives you concrete tools of what to say. And we know that one of the most therapeutic things that we can do as human beings is actually just be with someone during their time of distress. Oftentimes at the end of the day, that's what connects us most as human beings, and that's what people want, okay? So of course that also impacts and lets others know that we value, understand them, and accept them. Validation also helps to enhance identity. So at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about how invalidation actually caused an unstable sense of self, right? Difficulty understanding who we are as people. Validation, on the flip side, will help to enhance identity. So we understand ourselves in relation to other people. We are relational beings. We would not have survived or evolved as a species, literally, if it wasn't for relationships. And we make sense of ourselves based on the relationships with others. Validation also helps to deepen our relationships. Dr. Garrity kind of touched on this, but literally every therapy skill that we use, every parenting skill that we teach, validation is truly at the core. Validation also encourages others to be persistent through difficult times, assist in achieving goals. So I experienced this firsthand. So I told you, we went to school forever, okay? And as you can imagine, a graduate program, it was really overwhelming at times. So I was lucky because I had a really strong support system. So I had people in my life who asked me how I was doing when I was overwhelmed. They talked to me. They took the time to talk to me about how I was feeling overwhelmed. They definitely took the time to listen to me. And then I had other people in my support system who didn't ask me how I was doing, or when I was overwhelmed, they didn't know what to say maybe, or they just kind of changed the subject. And I can tell you that that was really discouraging and really isolating. Maybe you all have experiences like that too, But if it wasn't for my support system, I wouldn't have been able to persevere. So their validation really meant a lot to me, okay? And if we haven't convinced you yet why validation is helpful, so just a couple fun facts. So validation is actually used as a top strategy for CEOs. So this is what CEOs are taught, okay? And actually even hostage negotiations. Hostage negotiations use validation as their top skill.
Okay, so to break down validation a little bit, you can actually pull out handout, which one is that? Number
Handout 2.
Yep. So we wanted to break it down, and again, please don't feel overwhelmed by this and think, oh, I need to go memorize all the types. No, this is just to break it down and to make it feel actually more manageable. And again, at the end of the day, remembering it doesn't have to be fancy. You can just go back to the basics, which leads to nonverbal. Literally nodding, having eye contact, being 100% present, that is a form of validation and something that I think we kind of take for granted. Also, minimal encouragers like, yeah, okay. Tone of voice. So for example, your kid comes to you and is really sad about something. When you respond, making sure your tone of voice matches their emotion. So I would seem concerned, like, oh man, that sounds like you're really sad right now. Or say your kid is super mad and angry. So using your tone of voice to match that, whoa, I would be incredibly frustrated too. That is super annoying. So even just matching that tone of voice can be incredibly validating for someone. Second type, reflection. So again, this is just summarizing what you hear them saying. So I hear you saying that you're frustrated that we aren't allowing you to spend more time with your friends. You can then make sure to kind of check for that accuracy. Am I hearing you right? Next, inferring. So again, this is literally just putting yourself in their shoes, imagining what they might be feeling. You must feel so overwhelmed to be juggling all your schoolwork, friends, sports, and trying to make time for your family and yourself. Check in with them, check for accuracy, because sometimes we might be a little off, and that's okay, but checking for accuracy can kind of clear that up if we are a little off with that.
All right, so normalizing is the next one. So we all want to feel connected and not alone. So normalizing helps the other person to feel like something isn't wrong with me. Going back to those phrases right away, where we might feel like, oh, is something wrong with me that I'm feeling this way? When we hear that normalizing from someone else, that is so validating because that challenges and corrects those thoughts that we're having. So recognizing emotions that anyone would likely have in a given situation. So an example, anyone in your shoes would likely feel stressed. You can also use yourselves as an example with this one too. So saying, oh my gosh, I would be so frustrated too. That makes so much sense that you're upset right now. I would feel the same way. Okay, if that is true, we don't want to do that fakely, right? If that is actually true and you would feel that way, that can mean a lot to the other person. The fifth one here, this is just more of an abstract one. It's more like how you treat the person, how you behave with them, treating the person themselves as valid. So it's expressing unconditional, genuine support. It's not patronizing or condescending them, and it's accepting the person with their strengths and limitations, so the whole person.
Okay, so back to the movie clip that we watched at the beginning. For the sake of time, I don't think we're going to watch it again. But now that you've learned a little bit more about invalidation and validation, is there anything that stands out to you that maybe didn't stand out to you at first, but now stands out to you? Yeah.
So one question I have is it ever appropriate to coach emotions in a sense that, you know, if your child is maybe reacting a certain way to something that you feel is not, they don't need to react that strongly for, or maybe it happens continually or something, and can you validate and still sort of kind of talk them down a little bit and say, this isn't that big of a deal, or is that appropriate, or?
So I think it depends on how you deliver it, definitely. So you can say, wow, like for For example, I'm guessing it's like feeling upset. You're feeling really upset right now, and I notice that you're feeling really intense about this. And what I'm noticing about this situation is this. Help me understand your feelings about the situation. So then you're giving them a chance. So definitely in therapy, so what we will talk with people a lot about, and this might be harder to implement as a parent, but we'll talk about how there's different things that can happen with emotions. So experience an emotion that makes sense in a given situation, the emotion itself makes sense, and the level of intensity makes sense. We can experience an emotion that doesn't make sense in a given situation. So for example, if someone knocked on the door right now and I felt scared, that would not make sense in the given situation. So I don't know if it falls in line with that. Or
in the clip.
Yes.
Because right prior to, in that movie clip, Kevin goes down and his older brother Buzz ate his pizza. And so he's super mad, and Buzz then regurgitates his pizza in his brother's face, right? So his emotion there it made sense.
Yes.
It was very, very intense, and obviously he was engaging in some behaviors that were inappropriate, right? Name calling and all of that.
Yeah, so that's the last one too, is that an emotion can make sense, but the intensity level doesn't. So I'm trying to think, yeah, I mean, that's a really great example where the intensity doesn't really match the situation. Right. So we can kind of gently coach them, but I would also maybe reflect your experience. So then they have that as a reference, like, oh, dad is seeing it this way, I'm seeing it this way, and maybe even use your reasoning of why you're seeing it that way, but still validating their experience, because just validating in and of itself, again, is going to bring them down, because if you challenge them too much, it's going to increase their intensity and they're not going to learn from the experience. Okay. So anything that stood out from that clip before about the interaction between Kevin and his mom, about like what aspects of that were invalidating?
She spoke out loud negatively about him and he could hear it.
Yes, definitely. So didn't she say things like, don't be silly, or?
So she told him pretty much that you shouldn't have that emotion. And she also, what else did we say? Used some threats there.
Yeah.
Right? Guilt tripped him, like, yeah, you better say it again and your family will be gone.
Anything else that you all noticed?
When she said, everyone else was like, why do you have to be like a total different family type thing?
Yeah, and didn't she even say like, you should ask for a new family then, or something like that, which
Very
that feels
isolating.
invalidating, like total rejection, like, oh, my mom's saying I should ask for a new family, even though they were in conflict. That's still really hurtful. Yeah.
It just really bothered me when he said, I'm sorry, because you could tell he was kind of reaching for
Yes.
something from her, and she just couldn't do it.
Mhm.
Too late.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, that's literally what she says. It's too late.
Totally, and even her demeanor with him was cold,
Very
right?
cold.
So going back to those nonverbals, like her demeanor was just cold and she was very stoic, right? Yeah.
And putting him in a room that wasn't his.
Right, right.
Because I never thought about that until now.
Totally,
Why did he
yeah.
Yeah. Very isolating.
Yeah.
Any others that?
I think that kind of covers it,
Sure.
yeah.
So again, maybe we've all said or done these things, and not to, feel ashamed about that, but again, we're just not asking for 100% perfection, but just more awareness around these things. Okay, so I think this is the ticket here, because yeah, when we're talking about it, it's like, oh yeah, that sounds super nice, but really, is that gonna work? So how to validate when it's hard to. So going back to the basics, literally just taking the other person's perspective, putting yourself in their shoes. Really, that can be just, again, the easiest thing to remember when emotions are intense. Next thing, we can always validate emotions and effort, even if we don't agree with the behavior. So actually recently, my lovely 2-year-old decided that we were getting ready for the day, we're getting dressed, and she decided she didn't want to wear pants. I was like, okay, well, we do wear pants every day. And so, of course, she started throwing a temper tantrum and carrying on. And in that moment, I'm thinking, okay, this is absolutely absurd. I do not agree with this reason why you're getting upset. So in that moment, I really wanted to say, get over it. Put on your pants, right? Okay. Proud mama moment. And yet, I knew that I could still validate her emotion, even though I didn't agree with why she was upset or her behavior. So I was like, whoa, you're feeling really frustrated and we still have to wear pants. Again, trying to reason with a 2-year-old is kind of tricky. And though it is important to know that even if you don't agree with why they're upset, you can still validate the emotion. So she was very angry and upset. So I can validate that. The next one, sandwich technique. So I think this can be really helpful because it's very concrete way to remember how to do it in an intense situation. So what we do is we validate, we set a limit, and then we validate again. So for example, say you have a teen who is going to a get-together on a Thursday night, a school night, okay? And says, hey, you know what? Everyone's staying out till midnight, again, school night. And all my friends' parents said it's fine. It's totally great. They're all doing it. It's fine. I got my homework done. You know, I could sleep in tomorrow because first hour we're not doing anything. It's totally fine. Literally giving you 1,000,001 reasons why this is totally reasonable. And in your mind, you're thinking, please, like, this is absurd. You're not staying out till midnight on a school night. Okay, so in that moment, you could say, no, you know what the rules are. Get over it. Like, you're coming home at 9. Usually, though, the teen isn't going to respond well to that, and that actually might ramp up the intensity of the emotions. So the sandwich technique would come in here. Oh, I know you are so excited to hang out with your friends tonight, and I'm going to need you to come home at 9 p.m., and I know you're probably going to be super frustrated that you don't get to stay out until midnight. So what I did there was validated the emotion of being really excited and wanting to hang out with the friends. And the key here is I used the word and to connect the validation to the limit setting. Now this might seem minor, but if I would have used the word but, so if I would have said, yeah, I know you're really excited, but you're coming home at 9, what that does is literally you just work so hard, you're like, I'm doing the sandwich technique, this is great, but you negated the first part of that sentence, so they didn't even hear the first part of that validation. So we really want to make sure we're using that word and so that all pieces of this sentence have equal weight. So again, as I'm saying this, you might be thinking like, really, what's the big deal about saying it is what it is, that's our rule, you're coming home at 9? But again, I know you're all here because you want to feel connected to your kids. And so if we want our kids to feel connected to us, they need to feel heard. So we can validate while still setting limits. That doesn't mean we're going to be like, oh yeah, sure, you're upset, so stay out till midnight. No, we validated the emotion and we still set the limit around that. Okay, broken record means that, again, in an ideal world, your teen will be like, okay, yes, I get it. And then they'll go on, I'll be home at 9. I mean, that would be amazing, but the reality is they're still probably going to be upset. And so broken record means that sometimes we're going to have to repeat ourselves. And yet, if you can maintain and stay in validating, limit setting, validating, the goal is that the intensity won't actually increase. If you then like drop the validating, and just go to the limit setting, the intensity will increase. Also, after that situation, your teen just told you you're the worst parent ever and you've ruined their life. Remember, we got to validate ourselves. So taking a moment to reflect and say, you know what, that was really hard, and I'm doing the best that I can do as a parent right now. So remember, like, not only do we want to give this to our kids, but we need to give it to ourselves because we're all doing the best that we can do. And then also, obviously, if it gets really intense and the emotions are high, we can take a break. The key here, though, is to let your child know that you're taking a break and that you plan to return. And then the other key is actually returning. Because if we don't return or we don't tell them we're going to return, that's actually going to feel abandoning. And that is, again, going to disconnect them from us and mess up the secure attachment.
All right, so now we've gone over all the ins and outs of validation, and you all know this stuff, right? You're experts. So no, actually the practicing part is the tricky part. So we've taught you the skills, but the practicing part is really where it's at. And you're all off the hook thanks to our husbands, because when we were running through this, we were gonna have you all split into pairs and practice, right? And they're like, don't make them do that. So we took their advice and we're like, okay, well, we still have to practice because practicing is important, right? So we wanted to demonstrate the skills for you all. So we're hoping that we can get a brave volunteer from the audience to come up, and all you'll have to do is role play your child. So role playing a difficult situation. So maybe it's a situation where they're struggling, or maybe it's a conflict that you've had and you haven't been sure about how to handle it. And then I will be the one playing the parent, so playing you and doing the validation. So you're not going to have to demonstrate these skills. You're off the hook in that way. But we thought it would be at least nice for you all to see it in action. So we're curious if anyone would be willing to come up. If you are willing to come up, please just think and choose an example that you'd feel comfortable sharing. So maybe not disclosing too much personal info, or not too serious of a topic that's too intense for you. Would anyone be willing to come up and help us out tonight?
Don't be so eager.
All right, thank you so much.
You are so brave.
Well, I had a situation that I could use some help with actually tonight, so.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Blair.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Let's just pull the chairs over here. So tonight, as I'm doing this role play with Blair here, whoops. So what I would just ask is you all reference handout 2, okay? And a good way for you to practice is to think about, as she is talking, how would you respond in this situation? And if you could actually, Blair, just share with the audience just a nutshell, what is the situation?
So I picked my son up from the bus today, and he actually was a bit upset because he thinks his friend is upset with him because he thinks his friend thinks that he lied to him at recess today.
Okay.
So it's very fresh.
Okay, perfect. Great, I love it. All right. Okay, so we can go ahead and get started, and you can kick us off.
So I guess when I picked him up, I noticed he was down, and I just said, "Oh, what's wrong, buddy?" And he's like,
So you can role play him. Yeah, you
Okay.
can role play him,
Just
and
be
I'll
him.
pretend to
Sorry.
be you. Okay, totally
This
fine.
is a little different for me.
Yeah, I know, right? We do this every day, but
So you get to be him.
yeah.
All right. Oh, gosh, I'm so bummed. So at recess today, Bailey, I said that I would go on his side, but I actually didn't, and I went on my class's side. And now he thinks that I lied to him.
Oh no, you must feel so sad about that.
Yeah, I am. I'm pretty sad.
Yeah, that makes so much sense that you would feel sad. Tell me more about that.
Well, I'm worried he's going to just be mad at me, and he won't forgive me if I apologize, and I don't know if I write him a note tonight and give it to him if he'll accept it. I really think I've ruined this friendship.
Oh no, that's such a bummer. And I can tell that you've been thinking about this a lot. Like, this relationship means a lot to you, and you've been really thinking about how to repair this or make this feel better.
Yeah, I just don't know what to do. I'm worried about what he's gonna think, and we ride the bus together too, so I see him all the time, and I'm worried he's gonna make other friends feel the same way. I just don't know what to do. I just don't like it. I don't like to feel this way. And
Yeah, no one in your shoes would like to feel that way. That sounds really hard, and it makes sense that you'd be worried about this because this relationship matters to you.
And can I go on and say that then he started crying and he just kept going? So I guess
Yep.
that's the part I'm struggling with, is that I'm trying
Yep.
to, and I actually did try to converse and talk and say,
Yep.
did you apologize? And so the hard part for me was he just kept going on about it, and he kind of was
Yep.
dwelling on it.
And I would say it makes sense that he's going on about this, so we're just gonna kind of jump
Sorry.
out of the role play. You're totally fine. And you can actually take a seat, and we can
Okay.
even keep talking so I can stand up here. So in that situation, it would make sense. This is so fresh for him, right? And did you say he's in second?
Third grade.
Third grade. Okay, third grade. So this is a really big deal, right? This is super fresh for him. And his parents, right? I mean, I even almost had the pull in the role play to jump into problem solving, buddy, let's fix this. Let's make this better. Oh my gosh. And the best thing we can do, at least right off the bat, is really try to understand, even asking lots of questions. So you'll see on the handout number 2, even asking questions can be really validating. So what are you most worried about? Let's list out all your worries that you're having. So really sit in the emotion with him, because the emotion right, does make sense in the given situation. And then you can jump into problem solving. You can even offer that. So we shouldn't assume that a child wants to do problem solving with us. We can always actually ask them, hey, I know that this was so hard for you. I can tell you're so worried and sad about this. If you want me to help you problem solve this, let me know and I would be happy to. If you want to talk this through anymore, like, I'm here for you and I will help you with this. Then perhaps he's going to be like, yeah, Mom, like, I really need some help. I don't know what to do. Then you can jump into the problem solving, like, what can we come up with? Let's even get a piece of paper. Let's write it down together. Let's write down a list. Okay? Any reactions to the role play?
And thank you,
Or,
by the
yes,
way.
thank
Like,
you.
That
Yes,
was awesome.
yes.
I feel like a big clap. That was awesome.
That was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
I literally said to him too after he kept dwelling, chin up, Buttercup. I literally said
Okay, that's,
okay,
yeah.
you know, yeah.
Because we don't know this stuff. We don't know this stuff, and oftentimes invalidating things could have been said to us growing up. And so again, we internalize aspects of our environment, and that's something that people say, and it's invalidating. Yeah.
Is there a cue or a time period or when you would like stop validating and ask the question of, can we start problem solving, or do you want me to help you? Or
I would kind of take their cues. So I would kind of see how they're doing. If they seem to be ramping up for whatever reason, which hopefully shouldn't happen, but let's say they are, and they're becoming more distressed, that would be a signal for me like, hey, do you want to talk about how to try to fix this? Would that be helpful for you? So not just assuming, because what we could have done, what I could have done in that situation is said, okay, you can do this, this, and this to fix it. And this is what we can do. Go to school tomorrow, do these things, try to repair this relationship, right? And then there's going to be a total miss, because again, when we can sit with someone during their time of distress, including our children, that is such a powerful thing to do. So
And
yes.
I'm sure today that was ripping your heart out, because again, we don't want to see our kids in distress. And so it's our natural tendency to want to jump in and be like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We'll just do this and it'll be fine.
Literally, that's exactly what I went straight to.
Yes. And so to normalize that, of course, because you don't want to see your baby upset. Yes. And though, we actually will have a stronger relationship if we can sit with that and just tolerate our own uncomfortableness and sit with that and be there, just like Dr. Dustin was. Yeah.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Good question. So when the validation process has happened and problem-solving time has kind of naturally arrived, I always struggle a little bit between, this little guy or girl looking at me, okay, you're my mom, you're bigger, you should know what to do, right? Or, so that would lead to offering suggestions. Hey, have you thought about this? What about that? Or the other technique, which is kind of let them come to their own conclusions purely through questions. So let's see, if you do this, what do you think would happen? Now, if you do that, what would happen then? So
Sure.
Like, is it better to guide them because, yeah, I'm mom, I'm bigger, I should know? Or is it better just to guide questions so they come to the conclusion themselves?
I like how you're asking. Yeah, that's a good question. I like how you're asking them questions instead of just telling them. And I think it always depends on the situation, because our children do need our guidance sometimes, especially in those more serious situations. If children can figure it out on their own, they're going to learn better. So anything that we've ever done in our lives that we've been able to figure out on our own firsthand, we instill that in our memories, and the learning process is just so much better. And so if we can help them to get to that point, I think asking permission to, like, hey, I'm even observe that you're having urges to problem solve it for them. So I'm noticing that I'm wanting to solve this problem for you and wanting to help you. Do you want some help with this? Because I think even asking that question is validating, because you're considering their experience. And so I think either way, you could definitely guide them with the questions. I think the permission asking can be really huge though, because again, that in and of itself is validating, because you're taking into consideration what they want and acknowledging their experience. You're welcome. Yes. All right.
So we have a little homework for you. So again, we've thrown a lot at you. I know it's a lot. You have these handouts, but one thing or two things that we would ask is that over the next few days, just notice invalidating phrases that maybe you are using or others are using. So again, just notice it, have that awareness. And then also choose one of the 5 levels that we talked about and practice it. So practice it with your kids, practice it with a loved one, and notice how that interaction goes, maybe compared to another interaction where it didn't go so well.
Okay, and we wanted to give you some recommended readings, and just so you know too, this PowerPoint is going to be uploaded to the website, and you will be able to watch this talk again too if you want to watch the talk again. However, we wanted to leave you with additional readings should you want to do that. So these literally, I would say, are the top parenting books. So I work a lot with kids. These are the top books that I will always recommend to parents. So the first 2 and the last one, those are books that are going to have additional strategies other than validation, and I mean they're really so good. I would strongly recommend those books, and I especially like the first couple because they're really easy to digest. They give you the information really clearly. The third book here, this is all about validation, so if you want to learn more about validation, because obviously we only have so much time, we could have gone on and on and on with you all. You might have gotten tired of that, but you could read more about validation with that book. All right, so that wraps up our part of the presentation, and we do want to open it up now for some question and answer. So please keep in mind though, as you ask us questions, we won't be able to get into like personal details too in depth, but you all haven't done that so far, so I'm not really worried about that. But if it does get to that point, I'll let you know, because sometimes when people ask us questions, it may be more appropriate for a therapy session, but general questions and all the types of questions that we've been asked so far are really great. So we're curious, what questions do you all have?
Is it too late to start validating?
Never! Never, never, never. No, never. And I think, like you had mentioned earlier, kind of being concerned about my daughter not really like, oh, what's going on, Mom? Are you feeling okay? And so I think, again, even just kind of starting with those nonverbals and making sure that that's happening, because then it maybe will feel more genuine to your daughter. And also knowing that, again, it's never too late. And even if you did say something invalidating, coming back to and doing a repair with your kid and saying, you know what, I was really stressed out and I was not in my best frame of mind there. I want you to know it makes sense that you were angry. And then kind of reopening that conversation. So no, it's never too late. And we, again, as parents, have to be kind to ourselves and know we're doing the best that we can do.
And that's not even just for relationships with our children, that's for any relationship in our life in general. Whether it be a marriage, a friendship, a coworker relationship, really any relationship, it's never too late. Yeah, other questions?
On the flip side, I guess, is there such thing as over-validating that you appear insincere?
Is there a thing as over-validating?
Yeah, and you over-validate, but you keep saying, oh yeah, I understand, or you validate your feelings, but eventually it seems to me, if now knowing how validation works, if somebody validates my situation, I might say, oh, you're just doing your thing, but you're not really sincere.
Yeah, and so we want to be genuine in it, right? So certainly there could be over-validation, especially if it's like on and on and on. However, usually we say, like, you really can't go wrong with validation.
Right, and I think oftentimes when we're validating, we usually don't have to go on and on and on, because the child or the person feels heard and doesn't need to feel like they need to keep going. Usually they keep going when you go into problem solving or say, you know, when I was your age, then they're actually more likely to want to keep going or intensify the emotions. So yeah.
Yeah,
Does that
hopefully
make
that
sense?
answers your question.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
Okay. Toddler, they're feeling bored, and so they just go to inappropriate behaviors.
Yep.
What do we, like, what do you validate there?
You validate the emotion, right? So the boredom emotion, like, I know you're feeling really bored and we don't do this. And then the other thing that you want to do after that is giving them options of what to do instead. And that's actually a strategy that's in one of those books.
The first one, the 2 to 7, right?
Yes, that book will give you some good ideas, but it has you tell them what they can do instead. So validate the boredom, set the limit of what they can't do by saying, and, like, we can't do this. However, what we can do instead is this.
Like my toddler was just deciding, because she was bored, to color on our newly painted walls. And I was like, oh yeah, you're feeling kind of bored and mom's not paying attention. And we got to color on the paper,
Yeah,
right?
we color on paper, not on walls.
Yep.
Yeah.
So saying what they can do and identifying the emotion there that's triggering that behavior.
Yeah, because actually as parents or anyone really, we tend to tell children what they can't do. We want to actually tell them what they can do. That is much more effective because we think that they should know. They don't always know. So we want to tell them what they can do versus what they can't. Yes?
I find sometimes as a parent of like multiple little people that it becomes difficult when there's just multiple needs at once to like sit down and really take time to validate feelings when the other one is demanding at the same time.
Yes.
Like, I don't know, being outside today and my daughter started crying and needed to go inside. I can't like run inside with her and sit down and have this in-depth conversation.
Right.
But and sometimes they don't even know why they're sad either, you know? So it's like, sometimes I think that's where I rush through their emotions of like, I'm sorry you're sad, but it was fine.
And because it makes it harder for you when they're distressed too, right? Because that situation's hard, especially when there's multiple children, especially multiple younger children, right? That's a hard situation. And so we can acknowledge their emotion and we can still sit in the situation. Like we can't always leave, right? Especially when there's other children to tend to, sometimes they're going to be distressed. And we model for our children, so we have these things in our brain called mirror neurons. Children pick up on our distress and they model that. So if we're presenting as a calm present, like I hear that you're sad, I hear that you're upset, and I'm sorry, sweetie, but we do have to stay here because your brother and sister are still playing and we're going to leave in this amount of time, right? And we all do the best we can. When there's a lot of little children, we may not be able to always validate all of the time. We do the best we can and we offer the validation when we can, as much as we can. We're not perfect. We just can't, especially when our hands are tied, right? Yeah.
With the validation with a younger kid, like I have a 5-year-old, and so a lot of times they'll say, yeah, I see you're really mad, but he'll be hitting or screaming or whatever, and the and butt thing is great, like I'm going to try that.
Yeah.
But is it ever appropriate just to not talk about the limit at that moment and go back to it? Like if emotions are so high, like I try to be like, and I don't, you can't talk to me like that, and then it's still explosive.
Right. Yeah. So yes, exactly what I talked about with the lid flipping. He's not going to understand because he's really upset.
So you're just like not even mentioned that behavior at that moment?
I mean, yeah, if you come back to it, so I think we can say it one time. If we keep on and keep on and keep on, obviously like it's not working, right? So I would just lay heavy on the validation, try to switch to maybe some calming strategies, get him out of the situation, maybe remove him to a different room or something like that, and then come back to the reasoning later. I would though probably, if I was in your shoes, I would probably state the limit one time just for the off chance that they might hear me and might take it in. And I'm demonstrating that I will still set the limits, and then it's the repetition to, right, coming back to it later. But when we flip our lids, like he's not, and especially a toddler, their lids are flipped a lot. Yeah. Yes.
Someone had asked a question about hormones earlier, and you were going to come back to it. I was curious what it was.
Yeah. Can you say more? Was it about the question?
Yes.
I thought about doing the role play with you, but
oh yes,
would be too much drama. But just, I mean, she's preteen, and there was just one example where it's like, I'm so stressed about school, and this boy didn't respond to me, and practice was so stressful, and we did win these games. It just like the list goes on and on and on.
Yes.
You know, and you can just tell the emotions are just swirling, and then she's just like, I don't even know why I'm upset, and, you know.
Right, and I think, like I had mentioned earlier, even if we don't agree with, like, okay, you're upset about this, like in the big picture, you're not going to care about this in, 5 minutes sometimes, let alone 5 years. And so I think, again, just sitting with your child in those emotions and acknowledging and validating, like, I must feel confusing to not know why you're upset, and that's got to be overwhelming. And so to sit with those emotions, even though in your mind you're thinking, this is absurd, why are you upset about this? And especially because it kind of feels like it keeps going. So I think coming back to just knowing like you can sit and still validate those emotions, even if you're not agreeing with why she's upset.
Because it's
Do you have-
very
yeah.
real. It's very real to them.
Yeah.
So it seems so ridiculous to us, right? So ridiculous because we're at a totally different phase in our lives. Our brains are working and functioning differently. We don't develop our brains fully until we're age like 24 or something like
27.
that. Oh, 27. I thought it was 24. Okay.
Terrible.
All right. So, I mean, think about that, right? Like your cognitive level of cognitive development is so different. This is really real for them. Adolescence is such a hard time. We all went through it. We know it's hard, right? So acknowledging that it's hard. Do you have additional questions about the hormonal piece though, or does that kind of cover? Okay, good deal. I saw a hand over here. Okay.
How do you de-escalate when your kids are yelling at each other and validate both of them?
Totally. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think just acknowledging like, whoa, we're really upset right now. We need to separate. Oftentimes what will happen is they'll kind of like keep going at each other's throats, right? You have to set a limit like, hey, I know you both are upset and like we're not yelling. We're not going to yell. Sometimes we might have to increase our voice tone to get their attention. However, what we want to do when we've captured their attention, again because of the mirror neurons, is we want to lower our voice tone because that they will pull from that. You might not notice significant results, but over time you will. So the sandwich technique of observing the emotion of both of them, like, whoa, we're really upset here. And we're not going to like talk to each other this way. And I know you're really upset. Like, let's take a break.
Earlier you mentioned a lot of therapy with kids coming in related to the perfection piece and the emotions and that I need to be perfect. How do you deal with that preteen type A always wants to be perfect? Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to take this one? Natalie's like the pro at perfectionism.
No, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
I tend to work with adults. I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist, so I do understand this. But really, I think as a parent, just letting your kid know, and this can happen through validation in a lot of ways, but that they are good enough. And again, like that perfectionism and that perfectionistic brain set is always feeling like I'm falling short, I'm not good enough. And again, this community is very, very focused on achievement, which is awesome and it's great. And yet, if we're kind of constantly comparing ourselves and having this unrealistic expectation for ourselves, we're going to feel like we're always falling short. So I think as parents, making sure that we are trying to fill our kid up and letting them know that they are good enough. And that really does happen when we are validating and when we're saying, hey, this makes sense. And I want you to know I still care about you and you don't need to be perfect and I'm still going to love you no matter what. And again, that happens a lot of times when we validate.
And validating during the times too, validating what you're noticing that they're doing well or acknowledging, because we can validate effort, all of that stuff. Acknowledging that even during the times where you're not noticing the perfectionism can be a big impact too. Yeah.
Because reinforcing, we don't want to inadvertently reinforce the perfectionism. Yeah.
I have a question. I have 3 kids, 2 with more extreme emotions, but then I have one the other end that doesn't show a lot of emotion.
That's super common.
Okay.
Yeah, do you have any other questions about that? I'll talk more about that.
I have 2 girls, boy.
Okay.
So sometimes there's less emotion than I would expect, or just kind of doesn't seem to care. I don't know how to phrase it, but
Yeah, and what can happen is this.
I want to build some.
You want some emotion to happen.
Sure. And I hear this so much where parents of multiple children will say, but my one child responds this way and my other doesn't respond at all, right? And what can happen in those situations is the child who has the more intense emotions, because they do recognize they're different, especially if a family is communicating like, whoa, these intense emotions are too much, the child can internalize that and feel like there's something wrong with me because I can't control my emotions. And validation is crucial for that, because if we're like, you're too dramatic, like whatever, because that's the message that they're kind of getting when they're observing that there's differences, especially if parents aren't super emotional too, then they're like, I am different. They can even come to feel like the black sheep of a family. That's where we can see later down the road, absolutely not saying this is the case for your children, but I'm just saying in general, a child can experience like identity concerns, questioning like, what is wrong with me? Who am I? All of this stuff. So we want to just validate. Some people are born actually with a more sensitive brain. Some children are born needing more. They're more sensitive to emotional experiences, and those children, those are especially the children we want to validate. We want to validate all children and everyone, yes. Those children are really more affected by the invalidation significantly. Do you have other questions about that?
Well, just with the one that doesn't show, are there things where, like if you're not seeing what you would expect to be a typical emotion, where you would want to build more emotion or not?
Sure, yeah, it depends on how extreme it is. So I'd have to...
Nothing extreme,
Right, so I would say the more that you all model and talk about emotions, the more they're going to be comfortable with that. And again, every child, everyone is different. Some people just aren't as emotion-brained. Some people are more reasonable minded or like reasonable brained, right? And you know, your child may be that way. I think the more you talk and label emotions and validate all of that, say the emotions make sense, the more they're going to be willing to talk about it. Yeah. Yep.
Kind of along that lines, because I have a son too that is like no emotion and a daughter who's all emotion. So with this, like sitting down with them and showing them this about how to validate each other's feelings, or even like all three of us feelings, is that something that would help with a son who doesn't have emotion? Or is this something that's like too over their head right now and they'll just absorb from me demonstrating the behavior?
I would say it's not necessarily too over their head. I think they can take in some of this stuff. Obviously, some of it is too over their head. And again, what you model, they're going to pick up on. So the more you model this for them and sit down with them and do that, the more they're going to pick up on it. But I would say you can definitely talk to your kids about this. And I would say it's never too early because of that relationship with ourselves. And we have a relationship with ourselves. So talking about this is going to help them build that self-validation, that self-talk too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, aware of the time, so
we could probably do one last
more,
question.
Tony. Do we have, if there's one other question?
Okay.
One more.
I have a question more regarding toddlers. So I have a toddler who just started name calling, and it's completely caught me off guard. But I actually already was tuned into the validation thing of it, so I do use it with him.
Great.
But it doesn't work particularly when the whole lid flipping thing. So my question is, when do you kind of just draw the line? So like a quick scenario is the other morning he woke up and decided he wanted candy for breakfast. So I did the whole, I understand you're really upset because you want candy.
Awesome.
I did use the word but. I said,
It's
but
okay.
right now isn't the time that we would be eating candy. And
Sure.
then he launches into name calling. Do you just drop it then, or do you try to keep repeating the validating?
So I would do the sandwich technique like we talked about. So validate, yep, you're angry. We don't name call. And like, I know you're frustrated. You can also use your own emotional experience. So sometimes, so another technique or tool is sharing like, that really hurts mommy's feelings when you call her a name. And I'm sure that you would feel bad too, even though they can't really do that perspective taking cognitively, we can still model that for them and then go back to their feelings, but we can share and model our feelings because it's good for them to learn from us about how we're feeling. Their behaviors affect us. They need to learn that. Yeah.
And with the eating piece, with the candy, a really important thing to remember is saying a time that they can have it. And again,
yeah, that's
I shouldn't
really
go
important.
on my tangent about food, but making sure that you, yes, validate and say, yep, and we have candy at this time.
That's
so
a
again,
great
not
one, yeah.
saying like, nope, we can't ever have candy, but know when they know that they can have it at another time, again, that's even going to de-escalate.
Yeah.
So do the sandwich and then.
Yes, and then say,
Yeah,
Totally.
and even sharing again your emotional reaction too. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone
were
so
awesome.
much. Thank you for
Yeah.
participating.
Thank you everyone for coming. Just a couple announcements, and thank you again. Thank you, Dr. Newbeck and middle school for hosting. Thank you, Superintendent Barb Dufferin, and we have school board member Stacy Stout in the audience. Sorry, I forgot you. So thank you all for coming. Our next event is March 31st from 6:30 to 8:30 at Wildwood Elementary. The title is Nurturing Empathy and Kindness in Kids. It is the presenter is Katie Smith. She's a well-renowned educator and 2011 Minnesota Teacher of the Year. And April 14th from 7 to 8 at Matamidi High School Media Center, Social Media Self-Regulation. That is Devorah Heitner. She's the author of Screenwise, Helping Kids Thrive in the Digital World. We'll be sending out more information on those, but I just wanted to make sure that you were all aware that we have a couple more events coming up, so hopefully you'll join us for those as well. That's all we have for this evening. Thank you all for coming out.